and it can be make or break on whether, I mean, this is really obvious, but it's make or break on whether you do good work or not. And I've gathered that kind of knowledge over the years, and I think I've got to grips now with what makes a really good agency and what are the keys to getting that relationship really humming and really working. At the end of the day, if that relationship is smooth, you're more likely to keep the business for longer. And if it's smooth, you're more likely to get more work out of the client, and everyone's happy.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I suppose on the thought process of how you get an effective communication process between the board and the marketing function of a business.
It was really interesting because one of the key things that she was thinking of was, guys, are you ready to relaunch us? Are you ready to help us recover? She really understood the importance of brand in the recovery process, and all she kept repeating to the team was, when people are ready to travel again, or when people are ready to spend money again and get out of their houses, our brand must be the one that's front of mind.
Okay, Jayne, great to welcome you onto the Only Connect podcast today. Really appreciate you taking the time to come into the bonded offices and engage in this second series of the podcast, where we're going to be focusing on conversations with senior marketers, CMOs, marketing directors, again along the same theme as we started it, the importance of connection in business. And now you've worked in marketing for many years across all different aspects, both from an in-house perspective, agency, and more recently you're now a consultant, having left sort of an in-house role. So yeah, welcome. And we're going to talk a little bit through sort of the background and experience that you've got through your career and how connections played a role within that. So.
I'm glad you said many years and didn't specify.
We like to be polite on this podcast. No. My understanding is you started your career in London following a university in Ipswich. Do you want to talk us through a little bit about those initial steps?
Yeah, born and bred in Ipswich, London Uni, and then sort of fell into advertising a long time ago, and I worked for mainly direct and digital agencies in London for about 10 years. Then I kind of got, I guess I was bored really after 10 years in London, wanted to do something different. So ended up going over to Sydney, worked for JWT, which I don't even think exists anymore, agency, and a couple of other big agencies in Sydney for another 5 or 6 years. And then one of my clients offered me a maternity cover role for marketing director for an online dating company, which has to be the most fun job I've ever had. Yeah. It was brilliant. So that was my sort of introduction to client side. I did a mat cover in online dating, and then I went on to work for Carnival Cruise Line in Australia for 6 years. And Carnival is a very big brand. I don't know if people in the UK are as familiar with it, but it's a huge global travel company, but it was new in Australia at the time. So I was part of the team that set Carnival up in Australia and New Zealand, and sort of established the brand, built the digital infrastructure, got the team going there, and it was pretty successful. And then after 6 years in Australia, I was invited to go to America, work in Miami at the head office for Carnival, and was senior director of brand. So that was quite an exciting move to Miami. And then COVID actually, which is probably the full stop for a lot of people's stories. And after 2 and a bit years in America, keeping the brand alive through COVID, relaunched Carnival in 2021 across the US, and then took the decision to come back to the UK after 18 years away. And then ended up working for 3 years at Fentimans, the soft drink company in the Northeast.
Fantastic.
So that was the journey.
Yeah, and what a journey. So to take a step back to those sort of first steps into marketing and the agency roles that you had, is that an area that you enjoyed? You know, sort of a distinct difference to a point, and it varies by company and agency and so forth, but difference between agency and in-house type roles.
Yeah, well, interestingly, I did politics at university, and I've always been really interested in psychology and what makes humans tick and getting into that. But after dabbling a little bit in little political groups at uni, etc., I won't say which party, it's too controversial all the time, but I kind of realised they weren't my people. It was all a bit dull.
Right.
So with that kind of psychology thing in mind, I then started thinking about advertising, and that's how I sort of then ended up in the agency world. In terms of the differences between the agency and the client side, I think what I have missed since I've been client side from the agency world is the energy and sort of dynamism of it all, and also the ability to work on lots of different clients. The thing that I used to really enjoy is 1 minute you could be learning about, I'm going to make something up here, vegetables, and then the next minute you could be selling shoes, and then the next minute you're in manufacturing, and you'd sort of deep dive into a subject area, and that'd be like your dinner party subject for that week. But you're always learning and you're always moving around, and there's no time to get bored, and you're surrounded by creative people. So I love that in agency. But then when you go client side, you get to see that bigger picture of how business functions and operates and the whole sort of end to end. So there's pros and cons of both sides, but I think when you're agency, you're only seeing that small piece of the puzzle. It's quite surprising when you suddenly go client side and you realise all the other sort of aspects that you have to learn.
Yes.
Yeah.
And did you see any difference in dynamic between the sort of interpersonal element of those roles? Because I guess we, as an agency, work with clients, obviously, and that takes a certain type of approach, both from the client-agency dynamic, but also the relationship aspect and the fundamentals of doing a great job for the client. Naturally, in-house, there's in many ways a similar dynamic where you've got a team and you've got maybe ownership and board above you, and then a team that you may manage or otherwise, where that interpersonal element is still very important, but slightly different, I guess, because it's an internal rather than with multiple client stakeholders.
So you have lots of different stakeholders, but I think every client is quite different. There have been some organisations that I've worked for, and Carnival being one of them, where you've got thousands of people in this organisation and then the president at the top of the company. And when I was working there, she was really motivated by marketing. She enjoyed it. She saw the benefit of marketing. The budget side of things wasn't something that kind of concerned her. Obviously you don't want to spend money willy-nilly, but she'd really bought into building a brand. So a relationship like that can be slightly easier because you're already in the room with somebody that gets what you do. But then I've been in other organisations where your skill it has to be quite different, because you're not just talking them through why your plan is correct or why your campaign is the right thing to do. You're still having to go back and almost explain the role of marketing and the importance of marketing, and that is a completely different dynamic. So all the organisations I've worked for have been quite different, but I think the biggest sort of relationship thing and the biggest pressure is when you're working in an organisation that isn't a marketing-led one, or one that really understands the function. They kind of know they need to do it, but they're still like questioning the activities.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, through my experience, which is largely agency, so just seeing it through an agency lens, it's very difficult to generalise, and neither should one really, around, because the different types of businesses of varying sizes and varying verticals can really influence how they view marketing, be that percentage of their overall spend, or just how mature their market is and how mature marketing is within that in order to compete. There's lots of different dynamics there, but yes, it varies by client, I'd say, in terms of that how they address marketing and how marketing is seen by the organisation.
Yeah, and it depends on the background of the leadership teams. It's still quite unusual for a leader of a company to have come from a marketing background. There is a tendency that they've more come from operations or finance. So in their mind, marketing then is a cost versus it being, part of the solution or part of what grows a business.
Understand. I think over the last 20 years that I've worked agency side, it's often very difficult, and I think there's not enough focus on how the client thinks, which sounds like a very obvious thing when you say it out loud. We're here to work for clients in partnership ideally, and but they're essentially, we're partners, we're suppliers, we're service business to our clients' businesses. So naturally we should think through the lens of the client. But I think it's very, very difficult, one, if you haven't worked client side, to fully appreciate and understand that aspect. And also you do get, in my view, it's very easily to get trapped in your own bubble. Yeah. It's just the way it is. You work in a very close-knit team. You're quite inwardly facing a lot of the time. So you don't often think in that mindset of, putting yourself in the client's shoes and the client's seat, whatever the analogy is. Segue, but you're starting as part of your consultancy a client in the room initiative. Do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the things, it's not unique, but I think it's fairly unusual for somebody to have worked 50% of their career agency side and the other 50% client side. And I happen to have done that. So I worked most of my early career through lots of different types of agencies, little ones, boutique ones, global ones, groups, and then the last part of my career also client side, but for big multinationals, but also small family businesses. And one of the things that's taught me is that relationship between the agency and the client can really vary, and it can be make or break on whether, this is really obvious, but it's make or break on whether you do good work or not. And I've also seen many examples of what a good agency looks like, and I've worked with some really shit ones too. And I've gathered that kind of knowledge over the years, and I think I've got to grips now with what makes a really good agency and what are the keys to getting that relationship really humming and really working. I'm offering a sort of consultancy service at the moment where I can go into agencies, particularly the account service team, and sort of walk them through what does good client service look like. And without sounding like, an old lady here, but I am nearly, I think some of the strictness and the, craft of account service from back in the day over the years has kind of slipped out. I know when I first went into the advertising world when I was sort of 21, 22, God, the training around, how you manage an account, some of the admin side of things, how you do your status updates, how you do your finances, your training on upselling and cross-selling. I can tell from being on the other side of the fence that some of that rigour has gone. So part of what I want to do is, without taking us back to the dark ages or like Mad Men, is just bring some of that skill back into the account service game and just polish up those relationships. And then ultimately, it's actually helping agencies make more money. At the end of the day, if that relationship is smooth, you're more likely to keep the business for longer. And if it's smooth, you're more likely to get more work out of the client, and everyone's happy. Yeah. So, just bringing some of that experience from looking from that side and from that side. And hopefully as well, because I've worked agency side, I can do it with a bit of empathy. I think there's a lot of clients that don't necessarily treat their agencies that well. And I think there is probably a lack of understanding just how hard their agency partners really do work, and also a lack of understanding about how long things actually take to do, work takes to complete. And even things around ideas, I think clients can sometimes think you can just turn them on like a flipping tap, and that's not how it works.
I mean, that sounds brilliant, and I'm looking forward to engaging in that. The client in the room as part of the bonded team, which you very kindly offered to support us on. I mean, it's fundamental to our beliefs anyway around the importance of connection, which is the theme of this podcast, and the fundamentals of that are, we're a people business. A big part of that is, connecting effectively with clients, and the more we can understand as a business how clients think and what they value and prioritise in that respect, the better, I'd say. I've definitely seen over the years a shift as well, that has some complexities around it. I'd suggest, I think, the growth of the internet, without meaning to sound too old myself, digital businesses, e-commerce businesses, pure play businesses, that there's been a leaning into, for many reasons, a weighting of budget around digital marketing, and almost with that sort of evolvement often comes, again, for a few reasons, like a lack of priority on the fundamentals of good client servicing, and that effective connection with clients, between clients and agencies. I've also seen a real dynamic of big sales teams and agencies, particularly digital ones, on very strict and ambitious targets, and then almost like an overselling and a weighting of too much priority on that, as opposed to...
I've been in the room with some of those sales teams.
There you go.
I can see exactly what you're saying.
And then a lack of importance around the actual follow-up thereafter, and the retention and relationship building for the client. So I think that's a dynamic. And certainly I've seen as well, maybe it's just my career, but a positive shift really in how clients view agencies. And it's a very general statement, it's based on my experience, but back 20 years ago there seemed to be more of a dynamic between clients and agencies where there was quite a bit of friction. There was certainly less of a partnership approach, more of a sort of boss and supplier type approach. And maybe it's the evolvement of technology, maybe it's the evolvement of the breadth of marketing channels that we now have, where clients increasingly need a good agency to consult with them and inform them and work with them on developing their strategies, that we've certainly seen since we launched Bonded 4.5 years ago, like that integration of client and agency relationship, as opposed to that dynamic of boss and supplier. It's more sort of alongside one.
And I think also, especially the last 3 or 4 years, because of everything that's been going on post-COVID, the economy, etc., there's been headcount freezes client side and a lot of eyes on the size of marketing teams. So maybe there's a little bit more reliance on that agency relationship, because it's harder to have, that social media person in-house, or, we've all got the ideal marketing team that we'd like to create, but very few of us in our careers are allowed to have all the people that we want in the team. So then you do become more reliant on the agency, and the more you rely on them, the more you just have to work well together. And I think that's when the personality fit between the agencies becomes really important, because you can be on the phone to them half a dozen times in one day. You've just got to click. It has to, the whole cliche of it has to feel like an extension of my team, but it kind of does. Otherwise, you don't want that friction if you're on the phone to them that many times in the day. Actually, just reminded me when I say on the phone, I think when you come back to that client service piece and that connection, another thing that's changed over the years, and again, I'm going to sound really old-fashioned here, but the reticence of people to talk now, I think, can make the relationship a little bit taut sometimes. And I know that even from my client experience, trying to get my team to pick up the bloody phone and speak to people it's really challenging now. People just don't want to do it. And I think the back and because we rely more now on Teams calls, emails, WhatsApp, sometimes I will see between someone on my team and then someone in the agency, there could be 25 WhatsApp messages exchanged, and both of them have got the wrong end of the stick, probably both ends of the messaging. They're irritated with each other, whereas, you know, in the olden days, probably a 5-minute phone call would have sorted that out. So I do think it's unfortunate that people don't talk quite as much as they used to, because that really did help to help with the relationship side of things.
I'd absolutely align. I completely agree.
A couple of old dinosaurs here always saying this, but I think it's true. I do think it's true.
I think it's the fundamentals of like relationship building without, you know, going too far into analysing it. And it's difficult, isn't it? Text-based communication, being it over email or WhatsApp or whichever medium, it's difficult to get that emotive connection, which is so important to relationship building, which is so important to a client-agency dynamic. We should keep the flag flying for that one, I think, because you know the fundamentals of that dynamic have been there a lot longer than the growth in, you know, text-based comms, I'd say. And often we need to remind ourselves of the fundamentals of what makes good interpersonal relationships. Just on that dynamic, I think as a parallel into time, the importance of marketing internally at brand side, I think the general statement, but has grown, I think, in terms of the importance that businesses place on marketing. You mentioned before around which I agree with, you know, the dynamic of often a CEO has come from an operations or finance background. But what we've seen, I suppose, in the industry, particularly in the last 10 years, arguably even more so in the last 5, is the growth of the CMO, like the Chief Marketing Officer, or even if not by job title, you know, that place at the board level that the senior marketer in an organisation may be offered as a sort of structure to that business. And with that, an increased importance in terms of dialogue internally around the role that marketing plays. And often I see, sort of observationally, when I'm liaising with CMOs or similar people in organisations, that there is naturally a challenge, I guess, that is surmountable around how internally marketing is discussed, how internally marketing is presented and the performance of the marketing. But often the biggest piece of that is trying to build a mindset of strategic thinking around marketing internally. Naturally, you've had that experience in different types of organisations. You know, you mentioned Carnival, big organisation, and you know, the person you reported to was very interested in marketing. And often, you know, the dynamic can be different if it's like in smaller businesses, or the marketing spend is a higher percentage of the overall cost base, or is a family-owned business, or similar. And we see that across multiple businesses. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I suppose on the thought process of, particularly from an agency perspective, it's really interesting to understand from a former CMO internally, like how that dynamic works, how you get an effective communication process between the board and the marketing function of a business, get that internal connection.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes a difficult thing to introduce to a business where there are already legacy views. It's not always easy to sort of change the dynamic inside a business. I think I was really fortunate at Carnival. I mean, I was unfortunate that I was there during COVID, but there were, naturally, because it was a cruise line and everything that happened during that period, there were a lot of redundancies and furloughs. But marketing was really seen as a key pillar for bringing and pulling the brand and recovering from COVID, which may seem really logical, but I think in a lot of businesses, the whole of marketing would have been made redundant or depleted during COVID. And whilst a lot of members were lost from the team, quite a number of us were kept on. And it was always a key pillar of Carnival's recovery that we needed to be continuously working on what the recovery strategy for the business was going to be. And it was really interesting because they never took the foot off the gas. Like the president of the company, she could have been, I mean, she was thinking about lots of other things at the time, but one of the key things that she was thinking of was, guys, are you ready to relaunch us? Are you ready to help us recover? And she really understood the importance of brand in the recovery process. And all she kept repeating to the team was, when people are ready to travel again, or when people are ready to spend money again and get out of their houses, our brand must be the one that's front of mind. So everything was thrown in, the kitchen sink, all the budget, so that we had the biggest, marketing campaign ever when we thought that the COVID period was over, so that the brand could recover quickly, and then they had 50-year sales high when that happened. And that's a really different mindset, because it was totally seen that marketing was going to help that business recover. But if you go into a different type of business where marketing is almost seen as what's the right word? A luxury item, that it's only something that you should be spending on when you've got money. That's a really different type of business. Oh, we'll put a little bit more budget into marketing because we can afford it right now, as opposed to marketing being seen as part of the solution. And I think where agencies, I guess, can help on that latter type of business is, I know I've worked in a business like that. I have to be careful what I say, but I've worked in a business like that, and I think where an agency can really help is, it can be a struggle for a marketeer in that kind of business, because you're like, if we don't spend, if we don't focus on our brand, we're just going to get into this cycle where we're not going to grow. But the agency can really help there, I think, with helping that marketing director or CMO with those arguments, with those different ways to present. And sometimes when the business hears it from someone outside the organisation, it can potentially, have a little bit more power, or at least by way of repetition, help that marketing director get the message through. And I know when I've been recently sort of running pitches and stuff, one of the things I've looked for in that agency team is, could that individual stand up in front of my CEO or my owner of the company? Could I put that person in front, and this is going to sound daft, but would they be taken seriously? Would they have the gravitas? Would they have the right demeanour to click with that senior person and hopefully make a good case for marketing? And sometimes that's not because one agency owner is necessarily better than another one. It could simply be, I can see that personality would work with that personality, So I've got, I sit in a room and I go, right, I could really do with some help here. Could that person help me? Could I put them in front, and would they support me and be able to give a good, credible argument to the boss?
Yeah. No, that's brilliant insight. Thanks, Jayne. That is actually consistent with 2 or 3 other conversations we had recently with clients around that senior dynamic of the extension of the team, almost, where it's like, the CMO saying, can you sit alongside me in front of the CEO and talk about why we as a business should be investing in this type of marketing activity, or words to that effect. So certainly overlooked as a valuable part of a way that agencies can support clients, I'd say, but hugely valuable.
And I think, it's a real cliche, but when an agency pitches and they bring in the senior team, that's why I think sometimes after the pitch, then the client can sometimes feel like they're given a different team, or they're working with a more junior team. But I think still being able to know that there's somebody on the agency side at a senior level that understands the business, so that if you're having a critical time or need a critical argument, some help, that you can pick up the phone and you're not having to brief them from scratch, that somebody on that side with that seniority can jump in and help.
Yes. Brilliant. And on the topic, just to round off over the last few minutes, on the topic of connecting effectively to ownership, because we talked a bit about the role of a CMO and your experience through that, but a lot of organisations don't have that investment in that level of seniority within marketing. And I think it's hugely valuable what you've moved into now around, having worked with businesses in a position where you're either direct into the owner or the marketing team perhaps hasn't got the level of strategic knowledge or experience or whatever it is to be able to have those effective conversations internally. Being able to introduce a specialist individual who doesn't necessarily require a commitment of a full-time role at that level, but can play that bridging gap and be that sort of strategic a voice almost to raise the profile and the importance of marketing and make it understandable for the business is hugely valuable, even through an agency lens where, being able to work with someone like that in an organisation versus not, is a really, really positive thing. Would you like to expand a little bit on the sort of CMO consultancy, marketing consultancy offering?
Yeah, so I've spoken already about client in the room, but I'm also working as a fractional CMO, and I guess the opportunity there really is, like you said, especially in this economic climate and also in businesses which are in a growth phase or smaller, they can't always afford a senior person with a marketing background as part of the business as well. So to be able to, fractional is what it does what it says on the tin, to have a fraction of that person to come in and support the marketing function, but also means that a business can access, I was about to give up there that I had 30 years of experience, can access experience like mine at a fraction of the cost, and also on a time basis that suits the organisation, whether that's once a week, 3 times a month, or just for 6 months on a big project. And I think, like you said, I've heard quite commonly that agencies also can struggle a little bit because they might be selling in a strategic solution to a client, but the team on the other side is junior and they don't really understand the impact of what's being proposed to them. And it's not just the marketing impact, but maybe the organisational impact as well. And sometimes you just need that senior person on the team to be sitting there when the agency comes with a solution and actually go, have you thought about how that might impact the call centre? Have you thought operationally? No, you can't change the product. The wider impacts of what that agency is proposing. And also mentor the team and train them, and potentially if you're in there for 6 months, to leave that team a bit more equipped moving forward. So yeah, that's what I'm offering at the moment as well, just to step in there as a fractional marketing director, CMO, help these smaller teams out, but also be a voice on the leadership team as well for marketing.
Fantastic. Well, that feels like a really pertinent note to end the podcast on. Just listening to what you're saying there, it's the essence of connection essentially, because you're connecting leadership internally to marketing to external partners, and that real conduit. And that feels very much like a really positive way for businesses in the future to connect if they haven't got that function internally. So thanks so much, Jayne.
No problem. Thank you.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you.